Yeah, we have to give us permission.
Oh, crud. Let me see if I can figure that out. If not,
I can record, but I think it goes to my company cloud account.
I can record it. I'll stop sharing. So let me, Rick, are you ready?
Yeah, just about.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. You want to share the main slide again?
Yeah. Oh, you disabled the screen sharing. You got to enable that too.
All right,
So you probably got to make me a co-host.
Screen sharing's on. You're also co-host.
Just make Rick a co-host.
It's done. All right. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Christmas Summit brought to you by Boscoyo Studios. This presentation is sponsored by Wired Watts. Please don't unmute or interrupt the presenter, and feel free to put any questions or discussions in the chat. Today's discussion is on the Falcon Pi player, and it's going to be presented by Rick Harris and maybe Dan Culp as well. So I will turn it over now to Rick.
All right, guys, we got a lot to cover on here, so it's going to go kind of fast. We'll have some question and answer sessions. So in this presentation, I'm going to give an overview of FPP and its functionality. I'm going to cover the basics of the installation process, but not all the details. There will be a demonstration tomorrow in the build party, and that'll be at 1 o'clock. And I'm also going to go over some of the functionality of FPP as well, but FPP is so robust that there's no way I could go into detail on everything because that would take several hours. I've been doing animated lighting for 4 years. I'm from Meridian, Idaho. I'm the author of the FPP manual with help from Mark Amber and all the other developers, Dan Culp and Chris Pinkerton. They answer my unending questions, but I'm sure I bug them, but that's fine. I conduct year-round testing and quality control for FPP. So the topics I'm going to go over are: what is FPP? Why do I want to use FPP? What do I need for FPP? Installing FPP. Go over a general overview of FPP, some basic configurations. And at the end of the presentation, I'll list several resources that might be of a benefit for you in the future. Then I'll be open for general questions at the end of the class. During the presentation, I'll pause for questions at the end of each section, but hold your questions to the end if you can, because I might cover your questions during the presentation, and the time that we have will be limited. So if we get a little behind, then I'll defer it to the end of the class just so we don't cut off the next class. If you do have a question, post it in the chat, and one of the hosts or developers might be able to answer it in chat. All right, so let's get started. What is FPP? In animated lighting, you'll usually create a bunch of sequences that will synchronize the flashing of the lights to the music. But to actually get your controllers to play your sequences and music when and how you want, you need a program to start and stop your show on time. That requires some sort of player software. There are a few player software programs used, but the most common ones used are xSchedule and FPP. FPP, known as Falcon Player, is a free software program that you can install on a Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone computer, and is primarily a show player. But FPP can also be used to accomplish a ton of other things, such as using a push button or sensor to activate a sequence or other device. You can coordinate other devices from within a sequence, like starting and stopping a snow or fog machine. You can integrate it with your home automation system. You could configure it to email you when certain events happen. You can display the current weather. You can count down to a special date or event, and so much more. It's so much going on that it's hard to go over all of it, but we'll cover the most prominent parts. So why do I want to use FPP? Like I mentioned, the two most popular show player programs out there are xSchedule and FPP. Both of them are free and both have almost the same capabilities. xSchedule has some functions that FPP doesn't support, and FPP has some functions that xSchedule doesn't support, but both players are being actively developed, so they're constantly improving both systems, and they are so close in functionality that one really isn't better than the other. So what's the best way to run your show? The biggest reason to use FPP is the same for just about every aspect in this hobby. I have a response that I give to people when they ask me what the best way is to do something in this hobby. My response is, in this hobby, there's usually a handful of ways to get the result you want, and they all work. They all give you the same end result. But the best way is the way that you understand and want to use, and it comes down to your preference. The main difference between the two are that xSchedule needs a dedicated computer to play your show, and FPP requires either a Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone device to play your show. xSchedule is just slightly easier to use if you configure your controllers and models in xLights, because all your show and layout data are already on the computer that's playing the show. But with the FPP Connect feature and other enhancements in xLights, configuring FPP is becoming almost as easy as xSchedule. It's literally a click of one or two buttons and you have your FPP configured. So it's actually pretty simple. So what do you need to use FPP? There's a few basic items that you're going to need in order to use FPP, and a lot of it's going to depend on your FPP device, your network configuration, and the mode that you're going to run your FPP. Some of the items that you're going to need are obviously your FPP device. They're commonly called a single board computer. So there's several variants of both the Raspberry Pi and BeagleBone. Refer to the most current FPP manual for a listing of the supported devices, but at the moment, just about all of the Pi variants and most of the BeagleBone variants, with the exception of the BeagleBone Green Wireless, are supported. The SD card. The micro SD card is the heart and brains of your show. Don't skimp on the card. There are two things that need to be considered: the file transfer speed and the temperature rating. You'll need at least a Class 10 rated card. Most FPP devices are in an enclosure with a power supply, which can create higher than normal temperatures, and many are installed outside, which can cause unusually low temperatures. The standard SD cards are basically designed to work at room temperature. So we're in our environment, we're going way beyond that. I'd recommend either the SanDisk Extreme or the Samsung Evo Select cards. And you'll probably not need anything larger than a 16 gigabyte card, but sometimes a 32 gig card is easier to get. With a good quality 32 gig SD card running only around $10 or less, there really isn't a reason to skimp on this, and that's the heart and brains of your show. Also, you need to be careful of online vendors. There's a lot of counterfeit SD cards floating around that have a higher, they claim a higher transfer rate or capacity. So just be careful on some of the online vendors. And depending on your computer, you might need a micro USB card adapter to be able to read and write to your card. The software. You're going to need a program to image the software, and because you can't copy the files directly in a regular manner. You'll also need a good SD card formatter to erase all the data from the card before you install the image. The native formatting programs on Windows and Mac can sometimes leave unwanted files or partitions on the SD card, and that can cause problems. So SD card formatter is probably the best one, but if you use .NET Disk Imager, it has a wipe function that also works well. I've heard that Balena Etcher will wipe it as well, but I haven't verified that. You're going to need a computer. You need a computer just to perform the configuration and setup of your FPP device. You don't need anything fancy or super powerful. You can even configure it on your phone if you want. You're going to need some sort of network. It could be simple as just the FPP device and your computer, but you need something for all of your devices to be able to talk to each other. The type of network can vary tremendously depending on your needs and how you want to configure it and what you currently have at your home. I'd suggest starting out with a simple network configuration to test things out before moving on to a more complicated network. There's so many different network variations that it's unimaginable. A few miscellaneous items that you're going to need, depending on your FPP device, the installation method you're going to use in your network configuration and show design. There's a few other miscellaneous items you might need. For a more detailed explanation, refer to the FPP manual. But some of the more common items you might need is a power supply. This could be just a wall wart, a dedicated 5 or 12 volt power supply, or a USB cable connected to your computer. Make sure you use one that supplies enough power for your usage. Each device uses a different amount of power, especially like the Pi 4s. They use significantly more power than previous devices. So you need to make sure that you have enough power for it. The Beagle bones are very sensitive for voltage, so make sure your power supply can handle that. Going to need wires or cables, some way to connect your power to your FPP devices. Some of them use a micro USB connector, mini USB connector, USB-C, or even a terminal block. So depending on your device, it's going to depend on the cables you need. You might need network cables. You might, depending on the network, if you're going to be using a wire type network, you probably want to invest in an RJ45 crimp tool so that you can make your own cables so that you're not running excessively long or having to connect them together. Some of the FPP devices have either no or only some network capabilities. So you might need to get either a Wi-Fi USB adapter or an Ethernet USB adapter, depending on how you want to connect it into your network. So that's going to be a consideration that you need to take into account before you actually start doing your show, configuring your controllers. So, do we got any questions about what you need to use FPP? All righty. So, installing FPP. The installation of FPP is fairly straightforward, and I'll cover the basics of the installation process. If you want detailed installation instructions, tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, I'll be conducting a step-by-step installation and configuring your FPP controller, and you can follow along and install FPP on your device with this class. If you want to follow along with your installation, you'll need to have some essential item ready for the class, and there's a link to that list in the schedule. To install FPP, there's a few things you need to consider before you start your installation. There's 3 methods of installing FPP. They all give the same results, and which method you use will depend on a few factors. Some of the factors are what FPP device you're using and your network configuration. To install FPP, you do not need to connect an external monitor or keyboard to your FPP device. They're not used for the installation or operation of FPP. All functions of FPP are handled through the web interface. So preparing for FPP. Somebody asked about the Balena Etcher, .NET Disk Imager, and I'll put links up in a little bit. Okay, in order to prepare for your FPP installation, the first thing that you need to do is identify the specifics of your current network. You'll need to know what the IP address is on your router. You can get this by going to a command prompt on your computer and typing in ipconfig for Windows-based systems or ifconfig on Macs. It'll usually be listed as the default gateway for one of your network devices. Some of the more common gateways, but not the only ones, are 192.168.0.1 and 192.168.1.1. Then you'll need to decide how you're going to incorporate your devices into your network. Like I mentioned before, the networking aspect of our hobby tends to be the most troublesome for new users, and I suggest you use the simplest method before moving on to the more advanced ones. Then you'll need to download and install the appropriate image for your FPP device. You can't just copy the files. It won't work. You have to have an imaging program. The recommended programs are Balena Etcher and .NET Disk Imager. There are others, but these are the ones that are known to work well. So there's 4 basic steps in the installation of FPP. The actual installation of the software onto the SD card, then you expand the SD card, then you'll configure your network settings, and then you'll configure some initial settings such as your timekeeping method. There are 4 basic types of networking configurations used in our hobby, and this is where people have a little bit of a problem trying to get it configured. And a lot of times it's they're trying to combine different network types, not understanding how it goes. The simplest network type is wired on home network. This is where you connect your FPP devices and controllers directly to your router. This configuration has a couple pitfalls, but it's very simple. As you see, you have your router, everything, your controllers, everything connects directly to your home router. So one of the pitfalls is depending on your network and the connected devices, your show might exhibit some lag. For most displays, if they're quite small, it won't be an issue, but it doesn't take much to get over that. 2, you might not have enough ports on your router to connect all of your devices, but it's easily remedied just by adding a switch. For most cases, an unmanaged 10100 switch will work, but larger displays might need a faster switch. It's a fairly simple addition to add, but it does not alleviate the network traffic issue. Excuse me. If you have a large show and your network can't handle network traffic it's processing, then you'll need to get use a different type of network. But this configuration is an easy way just to get things up and running and to do initial configuration, and then you can switch the networking over later if you want to. So you got wired with a separate show network. This is a fairly common network configuration. In this type of network, you have an FPP device that's bridging your network communication to your home network in your computer, and then all of your show network is off on a different network, and that's commonly referred to as a show network. All your show network traffic is on its own network, so it doesn't interfere. You got the FPP device bridging the 2 networks, so your show devices can access the internet for such things as updates and keeping accurate time. If you only have 1 controller, then you won't need a switch. So a wireless network. There's really 2 types of wireless networks that you can configure. The first one is essentially the same as the others, except instead of a network cable transmitting the data, you'd configure your wireless interface to transmit the data. But this isn't really recommended because it doesn't take much to cause data congestion in your network. The second one is a master remote method of a wireless network. In this network configuration, the master does not send out the complete sequence data. Instead, it sends out relatively small sync packets that basically tell the remotes what sequence they should be playing and what frame in that sequence it is on. The network traffic is very minimal in this configuration, even for huge shows. This method works very well as long as you have a good Wi-Fi signal, and it's great for larger, widespread shows. There's somebody last year that actually had 72 different remotes running in a park and did not have any issues with it whatsoever. With this configuration, you don't need data cables running all over the place. The method does require an FPP device at each remote location, and each remote will need a copy of the sequences. But with the FPP Connect feature in Xlights, it's a simple process to keep your master and remotes up to date. One of the things is there's a lot of controllers out there, especially the Culp Lights line of controllers, that the FPP is actually part of the controller. So you don't have to have a separate one. They're an all-in-one unit. So you don't have to have a separate one. They work really well in a master remote. So these are the basic network types, and it's common to combine different types of networking together, but that's more advanced, and I'm not going to go into those types, but they all work fairly similar. So do we have any questions on the preparation process? Okay, so we'll move on. And we should have time at the end. So here's an overview. In this overview, I'm going to go over how to navigate through FPP, and then we'll go over each of the 4 sections on FPP's interface. Navigation in FPP is handled through the 4 headers at the top of the page. Clicking on a header will give you a drop-down with additional options to choose from. The items are grouped based on their function, and installed plugins, will be included in the appropriate section depending on where the developer feels they should be. There are help pages for several sections of FPP. If you need additional information, you can press F1 on your keyboard for additional help. There's also help icons next to some settings. If you hover your mouse over the icon, then you'll get additional information on that setting. The status control section, in our first section, it contains items that pertain to the overall operations and configuration of FPP. The status page will show you the current status of your FPP device and includes an overview of system information. It'll vary depending on the mode that the FPP device is configured for. So depending on what mode it could show slightly different. This first set of examples are for FPP configured in either standalone or master mode. The first section is program control. In this section, it'll tell you the FPPD status and the current system time. If the FPP device has a temperature and or voltage sensor on it, it'll show those values as well. This is where you'll also set the mode for FPP. The next section is the scheduler status. It'll show you if a scheduled playlist is playing, when it started, what time it is scheduled to end, the end strategy, and when the next scheduled playlist is scheduled to start. You'll also have the option to extend or shorten the end time of a currently playing schedule. Then you have the player status, which will show the individual song playing, how long it has been playing, and how much time is left for that song. You can also select a sequence or playlist to manually start. The master volume control is in this section as well. The last section is the playlist details section, and it'll show you the currently playing playlist or the one that you selected if you're doing it manually. It'll show all the complete playlist details, and you can manually control your playlist through the player controls that are down here along the bottom. This is the status page. If it was configured as a remote, it's going to look a little bit different than if it was a master or standalone. The first section is program control, which is almost identical. The next section, status, it's going to show the IP and host name of the FPP device that's configured as a master. So if you've got the master, it'll show you the IP so you can see it. It'll tell you what it's syncing to, how much time is remaining in that song, what song, and you have the volume control. Then you have the multi-sync status page. It'll show you what host is sending the master signals, the last time that it received any information, and data on all the different type of sync packets that have been received. So the FPP settings page is where you're going to configure several global settings for your FPP device. This is separated into several tabs across the tabs, and the tabs are going to, different tabs are going to be available depending on your system and what your UI level setting is set for. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because depending on your FPP settings, what you'll have access to will be a little different. The first tab I'm going to go over is the UI tab. On this tab, you have the option to set a UI background color, which would be helpful if you have several different devices and you want a visual clue which device you're looking at. This is the default background, and that's the blue background, and you've got several options you can choose from. On this tab, you can also change the user interface level, which is down here where it's, you see that it says basic. The user interface level is designed to only give you the options that you really need and also to prevent you from changing things that you probably shouldn't change. Each higher level will give you the options that the lower ones has, but the developers have set it up so that the basic setting will give you what 90% of users will need to configure and run your show. So unless you're doing something fancy, the basic level will probably be the best setting to use, and it won't give you a whole bunch of options that'll just confuse you. The advanced level will give you additional access to settings or features that are not commonly used in most configurations, and changing those settings requires some advanced knowledge of FPP, because making changes to these settings, it could impact the functionality of your FPP device if you don't set it correctly. The experimental level is used for testing new functionality or settings that haven't been thoroughly tested but is being made available so that the more adventurous users can test without the developers having to create a completely different image to install. That way the developers can get more feedback and fix any bugs before it is released, or the basic or advanced level of the UI. The developer level, which is the highest level, will give you access to all the settings in FPP, but there are so many settings in the developer level that if they are not set correctly, you can cause catastrophic results with your FPP, so tread lightly if you make changes in the developer level interface. I'm not going to go over any experimental or developer settings in this presentation because 99% of the people are not even going to need them. You can also require your FPP device to require a password to access the FPP page here. This is usually not recommended as it could disable some other functionality, and really the only ones that would ever have access to your FPP device is people that have already have access to your network. So if your FPP device has a higher security than your network, then you might want to consider who you're giving access to in your network. So the playback settings page. This is used to configure some settings that affect how sequences are played. The first one is blank between sequences. This setting will send out a blanking signal to all the pixels at the end of each sequence. Some people want a definite end between their sequences. Some people want them to flow. So depending on what you want, you're going to change that setting. The next option is to pause background effects during FSEQ playback. By default, background sequences are always playing. If you want to pause a background effect while an FSEQ is playing, then you can select this option. So it's going to depend on what you want, how you want if you have background sequences, what's going to take priority. So you have that option to select it. The remote media sequence offset is available in the advanced level user and above, and is used to start a sequence either sooner or later than the audio. This is used where you have a network that is constantly lagging the audio that it's playing. It'll apply the sequence to it'll apply the setting to every sequence. So if it's an intermittent issue, this isn't the way that you're going to resolve it. And that's an advanced level only. In this section, you're going to configure your audio and video settings. Depending on the device you're using, this display might be different because FPP will only display the options for the device you're using. The audio output device is used to select what device you want to process your audio. If you have a sound blaster or other attached sound device, you'll have to configure it on this page. For outputting audio on Raspberry Pis without an auxiliary sound card, the output device will be labeled as a Pi onboard audio, as it shows there. The audio output mixer device is what specific part of the output device that you want the audio to be output. For the sound blasters and other sound cards, this is typically the speaker output. For Pis without a sound card, it will be PCM. The audio output format is available in the advanced level user setting, and it's used to configure your audio sampling rate. Most audio adapters support multiple sampling rates, so the default is normally the best option, but you can select other options if your audio device needs to have a different configuration. Default video output device is used to select where you want videos to play if you're going to output videos. This will normally be HDMI for monitors, and that is the default. But if you're going to be playing videos on a pixel overlay model, such as a matrix, you can configure it here for your videos to output there. The Ignore Media Sync packets is available in the advanced level user and above. It'll allow videos that are playing from this FPP device to play at normal speed, and it will not try to sync the video to the master. Depending on your configuration and network, that might be a better setting for you. It's just something that you'll have to experiment with. Disable the IP announcement. When a Raspberry Pi first boots up, it announces the IP address that it's connected to. So some people that are broadcasting through an FM station, if they're booting up, they might not want that to broadcast through the FM, but it only plays right when it boots up. So you can disable that if you want it. So if you're going to use your FPP device to schedule your show, then you have to configure a way for it to keep accurate time. If your FPP device has a connection to the internet, which is highly recommended, then the easiest solution is to enable the NTP, which is a network time protocol. It provides a method for network devices to keep accurate time. If your FPP device does not have a connection to the internet, then you really should have a real-time clock installed and configured. If you enable NTP, you'll get an option to enter your own NTP server, but you normally do not enter an address here. FPP has a pre-programmed NTP server to get time. If you need accurate time from an NTP server, you'll also need to configure the correct time zone. You can use the lookup time zone button if you want, and it'll usually get you the correct time zone for where you're at, but it's going to depend on your network servers. You can configure an email address in FPP. It has to be a Gmail address at this point in time, but the developers are working on a method to where it doesn't have to be Gmail for version 5. This can be useful if you want your FPP device to send you an email when certain events happen. For example, you might want FPP to send you an email each time your scheduled show starts so that you know it started on time. So you'll enter your email address and associated password, and then you can enter text to indicate who the email is from, and then you can enter the email address where you want it to be sent to. You can also integrate FPP into your home automation system, and it's a pretty cool method. You can use it to control your light display, and a lot of people are using it where FPP is an interface to control a lot of other stuff and integrate it with their home automation. There's several videos and people on the forums that can provide help on this. It's a pretty robust feature. The Input-Output tab, this is only available for advanced and above level users since it's not common to need to configure things in this section. Disable Network Bridge Monitoring is used if you want to create your own network listener for bridge network traffic. Some of the developers want to do that, so it's an option there. The Always Transmit Channel data is used for some old controllers that will go into test mode if it doesn't receive any channel data for a preset time. The E131 Bridging Transport Interval is used to change the transmit interval when FPP is in the bridge mode. This is used if you need the FPP to output the E131 data at a different interval than 50 milliseconds. Some output devices will only operate at 50 milliseconds, and changing this could cause problems. So logging. FPP will generate system logs as it's running to help in troubleshooting. You should only change the settings here if you're having problems and one of the developers asks you to change it, or if you're an advanced user and know how to read the logs, but they can be confusing. This is what a log looks like. So probably looks Greek to most people, but the developers, they can pretty much pinpoint what's going on. So it's a helpful tool for the developers in trying to locate bugs. So the storage tab, this is another one that's only available on advanced and above level users or when you originally install FPP. In this section, you can change the storage device, but it's strongly recommended not to do so because it's been known to cause problems. If your device has eMMC memory, like the BeagleBones, then you can set the boot location to that, but this also is not one of the recommended methods. The recommended method for storage is to keep it on your SD card. That's been known to be the most reliable. The System tab. This is used to configure the specific device. This display will be slightly different depending on the FPP device you're using because it's going to be tailored towards the actual device if it's a Pi or a BeagleBone system. This is a Pocket Beagle device. So the locale should be set to your country if it's available. The locale is used in the schedule if you want to start or stop a schedule on a recognized holiday. This can be beneficial for holidays that don't fall on the same calendar date from year to year, like Thanksgiving in the United States. The status display is used to set up an attached display. Some people will have little mini OLED displays, and FPP will usually discover the display that's attached. FPPD boot delay is used for cases where you need to delay the boot of FPP when it gets powered on. Sometimes people will turn on all their devices, including their network router, off and on at the end and beginning of the show. And sometimes a router or other devices will take longer to boot up than the FPP device. So you can delay the boot to compensate for that so that the FPP can actually connect to the devices. BeagleBone LEDs BeagleBones have status LEDs, and they can be configured if you want it to do different activities, or even disable it if the flashing blue lights bother you. Geographic location can be configured if you want to use the sunrise or sunset function in the schedule. FPP has a program that'll calculate what your sunrise and sunset is, so obviously it needs to know where you are to know where the sunrise and sunset is. You can click on the lookup location, and this, again, depending on your network, it might return an incorrect location, but it's usually fairly accurate. If you're using a Pi-based device, you'll be able to enable the kiosk mode. And the kiosk mode is a special use case where you want the FPP device to be a completely standalone unit, but you'll need a monitor, keyboard, and mouse connected to the Pi in order to get it to work. So the next section in the status control tab is a network section. This is a section where you actually configure your network settings. You'll need to configure all of the interfaces that you're going to use. The WLAN 0 interface is the Wi-Fi interface, and the ETH0 interface is the Ethernet interface. It's important that all areas of the network settings are configured correctly. There's a networking class at 1 p.m. Eastern time in the Wally's Light Room, and I'll go into a little more detail in the FPP installation and configuration class tomorrow at 1 p.m. And that's Eastern time. The multi-sync page is primarily configured for devices on a master remote configuration, but it is morphed into something way more versatile, and it's probably going to even get a name change because you can do so much in the multi-sync page. The master remote configuration, though, is sometimes confused with other configurations that are outputting E131 data. The master remote is a very efficient method for managing widespread or large displays. There are a few features in multi-sync that can be beneficial to people that are not using multi-sync or a master remote. First one is you can see all of the FPP devices that are connected to your network, their IP addresses, what version of FPP they're running, the mode they are set to, and the current status, which is helpful in troubleshooting. You can also use it to get the IP address for a new FPP device that you're installing that's set to DHCP without having to log into your router or running advanced IP scanner. It's real quick and easy. Second feature is if you go into the advanced view, you can manage several aspects of your FPP system from the one interface. You can see if any of your FPP devices need updating and even update selected FPP devices from the screen without having to open each FPP device and updating. You can change the mode that a particular FPP device is configured for and even reboot or shut down the FPP devices. You can also copy files from the device you're viewing to any of the other ones. The multi-sync is a pretty awesome page. You can update, see what version it's on, and do it pretty much an all-in-one shop. It's a very versatile page. So on to FPP backup. It's a great tool for backing up and restoring your FPP systems. There are two types of backup. The first one is the JSON configuration backup. And this will only back up the configuration of the FPP. Things like network settings, channel inputs and outputs, events, playlists, etc., and save it on your computer. This does not back up your sequence or media files, etc. The file copy backup allows you to copy everything on the device with the exception of the operating system. A really nice feature is that you can copy the files and configuration to another FPP device and restore it from there. You can save your backups to a USB drive as well. So you could have one USB drive and have all of your devices backed up on that drive if you need it. But in all honesty, with the FPP Connect and how easy it is to upload the files, I don't use the backup anymore because it's just so simple just from xSites to upload it. But that's an option that you have. So proxy settings. If you have devices that are on different subnets, such as a show network, you need to have some sort of method to route the network traffic to bridge the networks. There's a few ways this can be done. You can create a static route in either your router or computer, or you can define a proxy host. A proxy host is a device that is connected to both networks, and by configuring the proxy host, you can access the device on the other subnet from other devices in your network by using the proxy host settings. So you'd have to configure each of your FPPs that you want to act as a proxy in here. And depending on your configuration, which I'll go into more detail tomorrow, you might have to set up several on one device. Events. Events is a cool access. In FPP, you can create events. An event is used to trigger some action based on external inputs or actions. Some common uses for events could be to trigger a projector to turn on and to display a video and then turn off from within a sequence, or starting a certain sequence when somebody presses a button. There's dozens of event actions that can be created, and there's a bunch of FPP commands that can be used as events as well. Events are going to be restructured in FPP 5.0, and it'll be much easier and much more functional. They're probably not going to be called events, but maybe something more like command presets. Effects. Effects are commonly used when you want just model or to run independently of your main show. Maybe you have something like a motion sensor to display a message on your matrix when somebody drops a letter into a mailbox, or maybe a tune to sign that just repeats the same sequence over and over. Display testing. Display testing can be used to test your display for troubleshooting. You can test your entire display or just certain models. In order to test certain models, you need to have the models defined in the pixel overlay model section, which we'll cover in a little bit. You can manually enter this using channel numbers displayed in xSlides, but it's a lot easier if you just use the FPP Connect and select the model upload, and it'll upload your model configuration. There's also a tab to test your sequences if you want to check timing or other issues. It does not play the audio with it, it'll just play the sequences. But make sure you read the note about the RGB patterns. RGB patterns are not the method you would choose to test for the correct colors. You would use the single color channel patterns. The channel number configurations might not line up with your controller configuration. So if you check an RGB pattern, red might not be red, green might not be green. So that's a common thing that people make a mistake. So any questions on the status control? I know we're going through fairly quick. Okay, we'll move on. And like I said, we'll have questions at the end, up until the end time. So the content setup section, it's where you're going to manage your media and other user installed files. The file manager will show all of the user installed files and have a tab for each file type. If it doesn't fall into one of the standard categories, it'll be in the upload section. You can upload files from your computer into FPP from this page, but a better option for uploading your files is through the FPP Connect function in xSlides. It's kind of an all-in-one shop. You can do sequences, channels, models, everything. Be careful in uploading files with especially long file names or special characters in their file name, such as question marks, exclamation points, etc. Some of those have problems on different devices, so just be careful if you've got those in your files. So the playlist section, it's where you're going to manage your playlist. A playlist is used to define your show. You put your sequences in the order that you want them to play. You can include events, commands, and a ton of other functions in your playlist. People don't realize a lot of the things that you can do in a playlist. It's common to have more than one playlist for a particular season. For example, some people have a lot of songs and they'll only play certain songs on one day and the other songs on the next day. Some people will have songs that play during the week and then a different set of songs for the weekend. I'm going to be going into detail on playlists in the scheduler in the next class that starts at 1 o'clock. So if you're wanting to get some more information on that, then come to class. And yeah, Dan mentioned that in FPP 5 it's going to be different. And yes, it's going to be huge, the change that's in FPP 5. And that's going to be happening at noon Eastern, I believe, the FPP 5. Well, it's at 2:30. Okay, the scheduler. The scheduler is where you'll configure when to start your show and when to end it. The schedule variations are endless. You can have multiple schedules on the same day. For example, you might want to have a pre-show with a countdown and an announcement to inform people when your show is going to start. Then as soon as that ends, then you have your normal show. Then after your show is over for the night, you might want to run some static lights after your show so that your lights are just kind of like a normal Christmas lights. But the scheduler is very robust. It has a priority, so you can do a lot of changes in there and do a lot of different things with it. So the script repository browser, it's a collection of scripts that the developers have provided access for us to use. A script is basically just a small program that usually performs just one function, like starting a video on a remote, starting a countdown on a pixel overlay model, or things like that. Once you've installed the script, it'll be available to use, and you can access it through your file manager. Some scripts require modification in order to make it work right, so you'd look into the script and read the code that's in there to see what to do. This can be done from the file manager. You can create your own scripts or modify existing ones through the file manager as well. Scripts can be quite powerful in achieving specialized functions on your FPP device. The plugin manager is where you can install and manage your plugins. Plugins are usually more complex programs, and it adds some tremendous functionality to your FPP device. They're very powerful. The list is organized by installed plugins and available plugins. Most plugins will have some sort of configuration page that you'll access through one of the navigation headers. The plugin list will be only populated if the device has access to the internet. You can also install third-party plugins by entering the URL for the plugin location as you see up here at the top. Some common plugins are big buttons, where you can easily configure a basic web page for users to press a button to activate a sequence or other action. The after hours music, where your FPP will play music from an internet radio station. Remote Falcon, where you can let viewers either vote for the next song to play or configure a jukebox types of interface that your viewers can select the next song, to name a few. James Vance, the author of Remote Falcon plugin, will be having a presentation at 3:30 in this room if you want to get more information. Let's see, any questions? Let's see, we got a few things in there. Yeah, Proxy host. Greg mentioned that Proxy host is a great way to access the web UI for controllers. There are a few drawbacks with it. Not all controllers support it, and you have to type in a funky address, but it is a great way. Yeah, and Dan mentioned about the screenshots. All the screenshots I show are for the most current 4.61. 5.0 is going to change, and we're going to have a ton of changes, and there'll probably be something coming out about that. Okay, and someone had some questions, wants to know how to get into them. We can go over that one-on-one later. Okay. So the input and output, it's used to configure incoming data and how to process it once it's received. The data can be sent out to another interface or sent out to attached controller ports. It's also used for configuring the GPIO pins for input or output. The E131 ArtNet bridge inputs is used to configure, as the name implies, E131 or ArtNet universes when you're going to use the FPP in bridge mode. Bridge mode is where the FPP device doesn't process the FSEQ file. It basically just lets the data identified in this page to pass through. If there's events or other data that's triggered by channel data, FPP will process those signals. Bridge mode is a common setting when testing for X lights or if you're going to be using several FPP devices that are being controlled by a main player. If you're going to run your FPP in bridge mode, it's recommended to use the DDP protocol, and if you do, then you do not need to configure any bridge mode universes. It's usually more efficient to use unicast inputs as opposed to multicast, but it's going to depend on your network configuration and your hardware. It's recommended when you configure this to use one input line per controller to make it easier to troubleshoot and prevent errors. If you do not need every controller entered on this page, you do not need every controller entered on this page, just the universes for the controllers that are connected directly to this FPP device. Bridge mode in 5.0 is going to change. Somebody put something about a net mask. I don't think that's correct. Thank you, Greg. And bridge mode in 5.0 is going to change to where there's probably not going to be this setting. It's going to be a setting where you're going to define what the default action is that you want. And so this will probably no longer exist. The channel outputs is where you configure how or if you want FPP to output the data. This is sometimes problematic for new people because many times they really do not want E131 output configured, and they do, and then it causes lags. But it's going to depend on your FPP device and how you have it configured. So E131 ArtNet DDP, if you're going to output sequence data to another separate controller, switch, or router, then you'll enable the output and identify what channels you want to output, what device you're outputting it to, and the output type, and which interface you want to use to output the data. If you have a cape or hat attached, like a Pi hat or the Culp Lights type controller, or running master remote, then you probably are not outputting sequence data. A lot of people think that they are, but they're not, and this will cause lagging if they have it. This screenshot shows what would be typical of an FPP device acting as a main player, not a master remote configuration, and connected to a switch with all the other controllers connected to that switch. You can see that they have all these different ones, one line per controller with the settings. If this FPP device were only connected to one controller, then this would not be the correct configuration. Or if this was a master remote configuration, this would not be correct. You only want to configure outputs for controllers that are directly connected to the FPP device and that you're going to be sending the E131 ArtNet DDP data. Sometimes users will enable this accidentally without knowing. If they're using the FPP Connect feature, which I highly recommend, and select the UDP out option to all in X lights, it will configure and enable the E131 DDP outputs. And if it's enabled when you don't want it, that can sometimes cause lag. So if you're using a Pi cap or wiring pixels directly to a Pi, then you would configure your pixel string output on this page and make sure you have them enabled. In 5.0, this is probably going to be combined with the BBB strings, but that'll be coming in the future. So if you're using a culplights.com controller or other BeagleBone-based controller, then you're going to configure your string ports on this page. You can put a description, your start channel, pixel count, all of that in there. But you can use, like I mentioned, the FPP Connect feature will automatically upload this for you if you want, but you can manually enter it. But the FPP Connect will save you a lot of headaches. If your FPP device is controlling P5 or P10 panels directly, then you're going to configure your panel and connections on this page. Configuring LED panels, especially P5 panels, can sometimes be a bit troublesome. P5 panels don't really have a standard protocol, and the protocol is not usually identified when you buy the panels, so getting them configured correctly is sometimes a guessing game. When configuring LED panels, make sure you pay attention to the arrow orientation on your panels, and make sure you identify this correctly along with the output connection and the order in the view you're using. So make sure this is showing the configuration from the front or the back. So make sure that you're comparing it to how you're actually looking at the panels. There's also an advanced layout view, but this is for specialized circumstances.
Rick, 5-minute warning.
Thank you. We're getting close. The other output tab is used for some less common output lights like DMX or LoRa. Output processors is used to modify any existing outputs. For example, the remap function, if you have a port on a controller fail and you want to move it to another port. Some controllers do not support dimming, so if you want certain channels to be dimmed, you can do it with an output processor. Pixel overlay models, like I mentioned, is used if you want to do per model testing, or some other plugins use the pixel overlay models. In FPP, you can configure some of the GPIO ports to take some sort of action when a button or other attached device activates. Some common uses are having a push button to activate a speaker, but it's pretty much what you want to configure it for. So the help section, it's a bunch of help and additional resources if you need them. The FPP manual, there's a link to it that'll take you to the most current one. The wiki help section is not being actively maintained, but I have a feeling it will be in the future. The help index is a separate help section that's being developed. The REST API help is a reference section for people that want to develop plugins or scripts or want to know what those functionalities are. And the FPP and FPPM usage gives you commands. There's a troubleshooting command that you can run that will basically do a system analysis. In the new 5.0, it's going to have a new feature for doing that. FPP has a built-in SSH shell for advanced users that want to access the FPP directly. The About page gives you an overall status of different things. You can see if you're up to date. And then the credit page. So here's a bunch of resources to go. I will post them in the chat. And but probably like they mentioned before in the main thing, there's a lot of good information as to the different resources that are out there. Okay, hope the presentation was useful. If there's any questions in a little bit amount of time left, let me see what is going on.
Just a reminder that, and it was probably in Rick's presentation, there is a Zoom room that is almost manned 24 hours a day between the different time zones. So if you also run into questions about the Pi Player or about X-Lights or about any of your hardware, go into that Zoom room and somebody can help you. It gets really busy come fall, but you can go in there anytime and talk to anybody about anything, and somebody will give you help.
Yeah, the Zoom room is a great resource. Yeah, and somebody mentioned something about the proxy. Yeah, not all devices support proxy as the proxy host. Like the Falcon controllers, if you have the older ones that have the older firmware, they don't support the proxy host. But if you update it, it does. So it's going to depend on the device too. Let's see. Yeah, playlist creation ending will be at 1 p.m. If you want to output data directly to GPIO on the pin itself, what settings are needed? The GPIO outputs. And in 5.0, it's going to be a little bit easier. Let's see.
All right, it's 12. I'm gonna stop the stream. You can continue talking for a minute, but I'm gonna